All right, so the Constitution is a collection of a bunch of really random plans and procedures and powers for the government. So let's figure out what is important about this document as a whole. First of all, it's incredibly important that this document is written. This is a difference between the United States and the United Kingdom. Like, they don't have a written constitution. The fact that our constitution is written makes the whole thing more permanent and more important, right? These norms and procedures are going to be the same until the words of the Constitution are changed, not just whatever each leader wants to do, but this creates some permanence and stability for our government. It is important that we know what the rules are. So when we encounter a president or a leader of Congress that is really doing things in a different way, that we call that person out for violating those procedures. This has like clear written limits on what the government can and can't do, especially a lot of written limits about our individual rights, so it's able for us to learn those things. We also want to remember that this is a Republican form of government, right? Now, the people do have the power here in the United States. The government exists because we allow it to exist, but this is very definitely a representative Republican form of government instead of a straight democracy. The people don't make the decisions on policies on their own. The people choose representatives that do that for us. So all political power ultimately goes back to the people, right? Congress gets their power from the voters. The president gets his power from the voters. Even the judges, who we don't vote on, get their powers from the two groups of people that we vote on. So it is important to remember all of this political power goes back to the people and that we are using a representative form of government. We're going to talk about this a lot later, but the separation of powers is so important here. This comes from those Enlightenment ideas we'll be talking about later. But we've got three different branches of government: a legislative branch with one group of people, an executive branch run by a different group of people, and a judicial branch to interpret their actions that is a third group of people. Making these separate is so important for lawmaking and compromise and limiting the power of the government. So we want to make sure that, in our country, the lawmaking and the implementation of the laws are handled by separate groups of people, and that's going to encourage way more compromise. And each of these branches is going to ensure that none of the other branches becomes too powerful. Another important aspect of this government design is federalism. Not only do we separate the powers in those three branches, which we call horizontally, but we also separate these powers vertically. Right? The states exist as a check on the national government too. The 10th Amendment tells us that whatever power doesn't go to the federal government goes to the states, and so the states can check the power of the federal government. This has certainly been true during this national crisis and global pandemic. When the federal government isn't acting, the states can step in and act. Likewise, when the federal government acts in a way that the states don't want, sometimes the states can check that power as well. And then the most important thing to keep in mind here is how much of the Constitution is going to be left up to interpretation. We'll go through the powers of the different branches, and you'll see that there's a lot of things for Congress to do, but the role of the courts and the role of the president is really left pretty vague and open to the interpretation of the people in those offices. So, that evolves over time. The president in 2020 is certainly a president with a lot more power than our presidents in the 1800s have. We talked about a lot of, phrases in the Constitution that are completely open for interpretation. Like, what is a speedy trial? What is a cruel punishment? And so those are the kind of things that we'll have to, that will be sorted out in politics in the decades preceding us and the decades to come. So these are things that are constantly changing, and this is why we would call the Constitution more of a living document. All right, so that's a lot to deal with the Constitution here. I know you guys, spent a lot of time this summer working on articles and amendments, so I know you guys have those down, but it's important to remember a little bit about what's in each of these things and to remember the different roles of the different parts of the Constitution here.